Some of my favorite games to play on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color were puzzle games. There was always something fun and sort of fitting about playing a puzzle game on the go when you had no idea how long you would have to play. You could always just pick them up and try to get as far as you could. Nintendo and third parties seemed to think the Game Boy was great for puzzle games too, since a lot of puzzle game titles were produced for the Game Boy, whether they were new or just ports of games from the NES or arcades. They seem to have the right idea for the future since puzzle games are pretty popular among apps on smartphones today. Did Nintendo predict the future? Anyway, I'm going to go over my top puzzle games that were available on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. I'm only going to stick with those two generations of the Game Boy since many of the puzzle games for the Game Boy Color were backwards compatible. That being said, I will still include titles that were exclusive to the Game Boy Color. The titles can either be original to the Game Boy or, as mentioned earlier, ports that were handled well and utilized the Game Boy very efficiently.
Did someone say Game Boy games? I love Game Boy games. Hey, MrTopTenList, I'm gonna invade this one if you don't mind.
Hey everybody, it's AT from SoftwareAgentsCorp. Yeah. Looks like having that studio audience installed paid off finally. So here are our top 10 puzzle games for the Game Boy and Game Boy Color. Number 10, Daedalian Opus. This was a Game Boy exclusive game that was basically a compendium of jigsaw puzzles with pieces made up of oddly shaped blocks. Each level gets harder and early levels ease you in by introducing new blocks every level. It's basically that for 36 levels. There seems to be an overarching story with this boy, but it's really just there to make the game feel more interactive than just you solving puzzles. The name of this game always seemed like it was meant to be epic. Listen to that name, Daedalian Opus. Considering an opus is generally a work of some kind, like a work of art, and Daedalian is based off the name Daedalus, who is a Greek mythical character who made amazing crafts, with his greatest being the labyrinth, this name does make sense to some extent. The title just seems so intelligent for an 8-bit puzzle game that never really gained widespread success. I would have just titled it something like Block Puzzle Mania Opus. Fun.
I didn't hear of Daedalian Opus until I started really getting into collecting video games. It's one of those titles where I felt truly deceived by the packaging of the game. I mean, you look at that artwork, and you listen to that title. Daedalian Opus. Opus. It sounds like you're going to go on an exciting adventure, right? Some kind of epic quest across deserts and forests, slaying dragons and monsters and obtaining magic swords on your Game Boy? And then you play it, and I mean, it's just a jigsaw puzzle game.
Number 9, Voxel. Oh man, I wonder what object this game involves. Why does he look so thrilled on the cover? Somebody should help him. Those boxes look heavy, get him a forklift. This is based off the Japanese game Sokoban. The goal of the game is to push multiple boxes through a maze to the designated location, indicated by the dots on the board. Each level increases in difficulty, forcing you to get more creative at avoiding walls and pushing yourself into a corner. Now the story of the game involves you working at a factory to earn money to impress this girl. So it's kind of like a 9-to-5 factory workday simulator. Great plot there, guys. Now this game feels like work. I would have just been better off thinking I'm pushing boxes for no real reason. There's also a sequel to this game, rightfully named Voxel 2. But on the cover, it could also be read as 2Voxel by mistake. 2Voxel. And just a year before the 90s band that produced everybody's favorite sports anthems, 2 Unlimited, came into the mainstream. Could this game have been the influence for the band's name? Doubtful. Incredibly doubtful. It should not have even been brought up. Number 8, Mario's Picross. This game was Picross. Just normal Picross with a Mario theme. For those of you who don't know about Picross, it's a simple puzzle game where you fill in a certain number of consecutive squares and rows and columns based on the numbers listed at the ends of the rows and columns. Fill in the right squares and a picture is created with the grid. There are more in-depth rules to it, so it makes sense once you get going. It's a quick game that can eat up your time if you keep on filling in new puzzles that get more complex. The plot of this game is that Mario is an archaeologist who uses a pickaxe to chisel the squares on the Picross board to add more story elements, I guess. This was when Nintendo arbitrarily put Mario on everything to make a more straightforward game relate to their cash cow character. I mean, they still do that today, but Mario has more established spin-off franchises. This was just when Nintendo put Mario in professions that did not fit him, since apparently Mario now needed a new profession for puzzle games. So Mario got his archaeology degree before this game? Is that the story? Was that before he got his PhD? Or was that after the boxing referee license? Nice try, Nintendo. There's no way I'm letting Mario handle this rare fossil or fill my prescription of unspecified pill that is blue and yellow. That's not the color I requested, Mario. Number 7. Pack Attack. This game could be found on both standard and handheld consoles, sometimes being called Pack Panic depending on the area where the game was released. My game of choice was the Game Boy Color release of Pac-Man, since Namco was kind enough to include both the standard Pac-Man and Pack Attack on the same cartridge. To the untrained eye, this may just look like Tetris with Pac-Man ghosts in place of some of the blocks. However, that is also what it probably would look like to the trained eye, since that's basically what the game is. That being said, it's still a unique and fun game. It's basically like Tetris, only you continuously get normal blocks and Pac-Man ghosts. So it's basically like you always have those garbage blocks from Tetris Attack dropping down alongside your normal blocks. You get rid of the ghosts when Pac-Man drops down along with a bundle of blocks and ghosts every so often. Pac-Man will eat the ghosts and give regular blocks room to line up and clear like the normal game of Tetris. The game adds an extra mode of management, where you have to make sure your ghosts line up where Pac-Man can eat as many as he can before he hits a wall. When Pac-Man either hits a wall or dead space between blocks with nowhere to go, he disappears. He'll follow a path, so when setting Pac-Man down, make sure there are plenty of ghosts in his way. Number 6. Tetris Attack. However, I always liked the Pokemon Puzzle Challenge variation of this game, since I loved everything associated with Pokemon, and that's how you sell more games. This is a puzzle game I actually preferred on the N64, mainly because you were able to go through and puzzle battle the gym leaders and other characters from the anime with all of their voices and Pokemon voices in the game as well. They even included some of the Elite Four members. By some, I mean the only two that actually showed up in the anime at some point, so Bruno and Lorelei Lai. But Pokemon Puzzle Challenge is the Game Boy version and not League, so this is really irrelevant what I just said.
Pokemon Puzzle Challenge is the Game Boy Color equivalent of Pokemon Puzzle League, except instead of having Pokemon anime characters, it had Pokemon Generation 2 characters. This is essentially a cosmetic makeover of Tetris Attack, which itself is a cosmetic makeover of Panel de Pon, except with Yoshi characters. Video game executives take note. If Yoshi and Pals isn't making your game fly off store shelves, just add Pokemon for instant cha-ching. Now, of note, here's something about Pokemon Puzzle Challenge that intrigues me. There's an entire Puzzle League game prototype buried in the ROM data, and you can play it with an elaborate button sequence. I'll put it right here.
My thumbs can't handle pressing all that. I'm just gonna go work on number 5 instead.
I just think it's crazy. An entire game literally built on top of another game. All that unused music and sprite data just buried somewhere in the game's code. If you have Pokemon Puzzle Challenge lying around in your garage somewhere, just remember that if you ever want to play a bare-bones version of Panel de Pon, it's only a ridiculously convoluted button press away.
Number 5. Quirk. Here we have the underappreciated brother of Cool Spot, the former 7-Up mascot, solving puzzles by moving blocks, rotating doors, and just making pathways over ditches in the ground. The goal of the game is to get from one side of the screen to the other, with difficulty increasing as per usual. The game is basically the dungeon puzzles you'd see in some other game series, like Legend of Zelda. It always reminded me of the puzzles you would have to solve in Pokemon, like using strength to get boulders out of the way, or a really specific example, the Fortree City Gym in Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. There's a good amount of rotating doors in the puzzles of that gym, and there's a good amount of rotating doors in the puzzles of this game. Winona, is that you? Did you do this? Your motivation for this game, besides your love of solving puzzles, is Quirk has to rescue his girlfriend with the help of his vegetable friends. Yeah, I was wrong on the cool spot comment earlier. Quirk is a tomato, as is his girlfriend, and his friends are other sentient vegetables. Though tomatoes are actually fruits, but they're all produce in the end. So Quirk's girlfriend is lost in this labyrinth. Now, did she actually get lost, or is there a greater villain behind this? They're both tomatoes, and any Pokemon based off produce is usually grass type. Grass type Pokemon are weak to flying type. The Fortree City Gym specializes in flying type, so that means it is Winona. Oh, I know you're behind this. Number 4, Mole Mania.
Mole Mania differs greatly from some of the other games on this list. For one, Mole Mania has an actual narrative, as opposed to seeing a bunch of colorful blocks fall down endlessly. Not a particularly outstanding narrative, but a narrative nonetheless. The evil farmer Jinbei has gotten tired of the moles ruining his crops, so he decides to kidnap Muddy Mole's family. You play as Muddy Mole and traverse the gardens of Jinbei Land to save them. Whereas other puzzle games like Tetris and Puzzle League are about reacting to the game until you inevitably lose, Mole Mania is an action-adventure puzzle game, kinda like the classic top-down Zeldas or For the Frog the Bell Tolls, although not nearly as big in scope. The levels are composed of puzzle rooms that you have to solve in order to get to the next room. You move obstacles above and underground, do cabbage suplexes on all sorts of enemies, clear the path, get to the next room until you get to the boss fight. If you move objects in such a way to make the room unsolvable, you can always leave the room to reset it. The game starts off pretty basic, but let me tell you, the difficulty spikes pretty early on, and a lot of the later puzzles in the game require a lot of thought. It's an overall admirable and enjoyable game, but the major downside for me is that you can accidentally trap yourself if you consistently play badly, due to the game's autosave feature. Just play carefully and strategically, and you might just dig Mole Mania. Because that's what it says on the packaging.
Number 3, Tetris. This does not represent Tetris's ranking as a puzzle game in general. If that were the case, it may have to be number 1. This is just my personal ranking of Tetris as a Game Boy puzzle game. What new information can I give about this game? It's Tetris. It's one of the most iconic video games in history. Easy to pick up, but difficult to master. No matter who you are, you should at least get some enjoyment out of playing Tetris, whether it's for hours or just a few minutes. Considering how many associate puzzle games with mobile phone gaming today, Tetris's popularity on the original Game Boy could be called a precursor to that trend today. It's not just the fact that Tetris was the granddaddy of all puzzle games, but also because it was one of the best-selling games for the Game Boy, in fact the top-selling, 35 million plus copies sold. Despite the fact that it was just a port, it might as well be treated as its own unique title based on how influential it was to the Game Boy. It was bundled with the original Game Boy when it was first put out in the US and Europe to help boost sales, and it was the first game that utilized the link cable. Some have even called it the best port of Tetris across any home console. Number 2, Rocks. This game was on multiple platforms, but it feels perfect for the Game Boy. This one comes down to personal preference. I played it a lot as a kid, and I still find it to be an addictive puzzle game today. It's a simple game that forces you to think in a short period of time. It's a dice stacking game where, like in many puzzle games, you have to prevent the screen from filling up with blocks. You clear the screen by strategically having each pair of dice stack accordingly. Now here comes the seemingly complicated explanation of the game. You clear dice by getting 2 dice of the same value in the same row horizontally or vertically, with the number of dice between the 2 identical values equating to the value on the dice. The numbers on the dice sandwiched between the dice of equal value do not matter. So you only want to get one die between two ones, two dice between two twos, and so on. You really need to think ahead with your higher values. If you get a 6, you generally want to have those at the ends of the board since they force you to take up a lot of room if you plan to get the points from clearing a 6. A better strategy, though, might be to simply put the 6 values between the lower values to avoid worrying about your screen filling up too fast. When the dice disappear, you have the chance to initiate combos if you place your dice tactically. The challenges don't stop there, though. The game will introduce green dice as you advance in levels. The extra rule here is that if the dice at the end of your chain are different colors, only the alike values at each end will disappear, so you have to stick with all that in the middle. You will have a lot more to clear, but there is more combo potential to rack up the points. Occasionally this bubble will appear that clears all dice touching it, so look out for those. You can either play the traditional mode where you get certain amounts of points by clearing dice, which advance you to the next stage of difficulty, or endless mode, which should be self-explanatory. The visuals for this one are not too interesting, but it's nice to see that the dice guy here is happy when I do something positive. Wait, no, not those dice. Wait, what are you doing? Ah, yeah, you deserve that. NumberOne. This is my favorite puzzle game I had for my Game Boy Color. It may not be the most well-known or innovative game, but I had the most fun playing it among puzzle games on the Game Boy. It's hard to define one puzzle game as better than all others on factors outside of personal preference unless you go by surveys or sales numbers, which I guess would mean Tetris, but here it is. NumberOne, Magical Drop. As with many Game Boy puzzle games, this was a port, but it had a very accurate port in terms of how it emulated the game. This was actually a port of Magical Drop 3 as it was known on consoles, but it was packaged as just Magical Drop, making it seem like a shiny new game. The game starts with a simple concept to keep the board clear of multicolored bubbles and add to your point total. Bubbles can be cleared when at least 3 bubbles of the same color are matched, being triggered when the player picks a certain color off the board. Once a color is selected, like green, you can continue collecting green bubbles on the bottom layer and throw them up whenever you please. If you have at least 3 matched when you release the bubbles, they'll disappear and take any of the same colors in the same column or perpendicular row with them. This can also trigger combos as bubbles are moved up to form more vertical and horizontal rows of alike colors. Rows can be cleared by having at least one bubble clash with a bubble of the same color. So if 3 of a kind happen to fall as bubbles continue to fall downwards, it's up to the player to activate them. There are also special bubbles that add some twists to the game, like rare bubbles that clear all bubbles on the field of the same color when they are included in that row that is cleared, or colorless bubbles that gain their color based on what bubbles you break on them, or empty bubbles. They're just here to annoy you. But what makes the game feel extra interesting are the aesthetics to it. From when you turn on the game, it feels like you're entering this epic adventure. It may just be stills, but it got me really interested when I turned on the game for the first time. It shows all the characters being themselves and getting ready for some epic adventures. When you start the game, you have to pick a character. This character will be walking in the background as you try to clear the board, and keep it clear. If you get close to failing, the character will start looking at you nervously or angrily. If you get combos, they'll react and keep reacting with different animations as the combos continue. It's an added bonus to make you feel like you're protecting this character by playing the game. It's like in the Final Fight Continue screen where if you let the countdown reach 0, it's implied your character dies since they're tied up with dynamite in front of them. I mean, Starr here is about to cry if I lose. It makes me feel so guilty. She looks so happy in all of her other artwork. Please, don't cry. Why can't you just look at me awkwardly like the other characters? Even though the Game Boy Color version doesn't have the challenge modes with character endings in the console or arcade versions, they managed to incorporate personality in the movements and expressions of these characters. Also, the booklet that came with this game had additional characters with bios that would imply you could select them in-game, but they never appeared anywhere. I later learned they were in the arcade and console versions, but I never knew how to make them appear in the portable versions. It just gave me an extra incentive to play when I was younger, even though I was making my own rumors on how to get them. Your cursor for selecting the bubbles was also a gesture, so that was cool. In fact, all the characters were based on tarot cards, which have some roots in medieval gaming and fortune-telling, giving the game a mystical feel. Each character was well designed. Also, the pink-haired girl in the duo called Lovers was named Rainy. Coincidence? Probably, maybe, I don't have a conclusion. So, Magical Drop. It's a fun game all around with some great design choices. Come for the puzzle games, stay for the puzzle games, and characters. So now with the list done, what do you think? Are you a fan of any of the games I spoke about? Are there any puzzle games for the original Game Boy or Game Boy Color I left off the list that you would have liked that I included? Let me know. Thank you all for watching, and an extra thanks to AT from SoftwareAgentsCorp for his own insights and footage on some of these games. Additional shout-out thanks to Danny Bereza, our Marcel, and Matt Mulligan. If you want to see more from AT, check out his channel SoftwareAgentsCorp for content like video game reviews. And if you want to see more videos like this one from me, besides the standard like, comment, and subscribe, I have a few other videos to check out, like one about Game Boy accessories and some of our favorite marine friends in gaming. So I'll linger here for a bit if you want to click any of those link annotations. Did you notice all those puns on the Game Boy boxes? Quirk was amazing, you'll dig Mole Mania, and Tetris said from Russia with love. So one of the most iconic Game Boy games has a James Bond reference on its box. How about that fun fact? Anyway, see you all next time.